despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering, like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not.
I returned from my prayers to find all three of my friends sleeping again. Why, O Lord, why must I walk alone? I closed my eyes in sorrow. They must have sensed my presence, for all three stirred awake. They said not a word, still ashamed of falling asleep. I turned and walked back to the place where I had been praying. I poured out my soul, praying to keep the tempter away from my disciples, praying for comfort as I walked this road. When I returned a third time to find them sleeping, I cried out bitterly in great disappointment. Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough. The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Let us go. Here comes my betrayer.
Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, Rabbi, and kissed him. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Am I leading a rebellion? Said Jesus, that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled. Then everyone deserted him and fled.
James, John, and I followed Jesus, still groggy from our sleep and ashamed of disappointing our Lord. Twice tonight, Jesus had spoken of a betrayer. Then he claimed that I would deny him 3 times. I would abandon him. After the events of this evening, I thought about those words. No, I must be strong and prevent this betrayer from taking my Lord away. As we continued to follow Jesus through the garden, I saw a glimmer of light from torches and heard many voices. Men armed with clubs and swords, some temple guards and some local men, came into the garden, following Judas. Judas walked up to Jesus and bowed respectfully. Rabbi, he said, and kissed him on the cheek, as was customary between rabbis and their disciples. Several of the armed men seized Jesus and began to bind him with cords. No, they're not going to take my Lord here, not without a fight. The commotion had attracted people who were trickling into Jerusalem for the Passover. Several of these men and a few of us disciples pulled out our swords. I struck at the high priest's servant, the leader of the troops. My sword slashed through the air to cut off the servant's ear. Then Jesus cried out, Enough! I dropped my sword.
Am I leading a rebellion that you come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled.
The temple guards began to ready their weapons, anticipating the fight. The boldness I had felt moments earlier vanished. I turned and fled, afraid for my life. The other disciples and bystanders fled as well. Despite everything I had said, I left Jesus alone.
elders of the people, both the chief priests and teachers of the law, met together, and Jesus was led before them. "If you are the Christ," they said, "tell us." Jesus answered, "If I tell you, you will not believe me. And if I asked you, you would not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God." They all asked, "Are you then the Son of God?" He replied, "You are right in saying that I am." Then they said, "Why do we need any more testimony? We have heard it from his own lips."
I waited in the temple with the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes. As the high priest, I was worried about the outcome of the evening. I looked out into the courtyard and saw the guard leading a bound man back to the temple. We assembled and waited to question Jesus, this man whom the Pharisees claimed had blasphemed God. I feared that his capture might involve violence. My servant was the first to arrive, out of breath, at the temple. He told me between gasps that one of Jesus' followers had cut off his ear with a sword, but Jesus had touched his ear and healed it. He also said that Jesus' disciples had fled. I wondered if he had been mistaken about the ear being cut off, but my servant is very reliable. So I took into consideration everything he had said to me as I left to join the council. We listened to the testimony of the men the Pharisees had brought. One by one, they told us what they'd heard Jesus say. Some claimed that he would destroy the temple. Others claimed that he said it would be rebuilt, but not with human hands. Some claimed that he said he was the Messiah, the Son of God. The testimonies varied widely. They didn't agree on anything. The law required us to have 2 witnesses before we could convict this man of a crime or a wrongdoing. We could find no testimony to condemn this Jesus to death. At this point, I stood up and silenced the crowd. I asked Jesus, "Do you have any reply to the accusations they bring against you?" But the man was oddly silent, neither protesting nor agreeing to the charges. So I asked him again, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of God?"
You have said so. But you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven.
He admitted his blasphemy with his own lips. At that, I tore my clothes and cried, "Why do we need any more witnesses? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?" All of the council agreed that he was deserving of death. Some of the chief priests spat on him. Others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, Messiah. Who hit you?" I went back inside to think. While I was sure that Jesus' own words had condemned him and that he was deserving of death, under Roman law, we could not kill him without the whole Roman army coming down upon us. We needed to take him to Pilate, the governor of Judah. Only Pilate could have him condemned to death. The guard would keep Jesus at the temple until morning, and we simply could not let him blaspheme God. If only Pilate will see it that way.
It was a night I wish had never happened. Jesus was right when he said at dinner that his betrayer would wish he'd never been born. That's exactly how I felt. I thought that Jesus and I were on the same page. That march to Jerusalem during Passover, when there were over 160,000 Jews, we were starting the revolution, right? Right? I knew that Jesus was not popular among the Sanhedrin, and a claim of kingship would bring the whole Roman army down upon us. But the Romans had slaughtered 7 Galileans in the temple on top of their own sacrifices. No Jew would stand to watch this go down unpunished. All it needed was a little spark. Something that would get the Jews riled up enough to throw the Romans out of town. It seemed like a simple plan. All I had to do was identify Jesus to the temple guard that night. Simple. Like any good disciple, I'd kiss him upon the cheek. That was supposed to be the spark. But when the swords came out and Jesus rebuked them, he went with the guard peacefully. And the other disciples fled, cowards, all of them. But now Jesus had been handed over to the Romans. It's only a matter of time before he is put to death. What went wrong?
Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows, yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed.